conference, it gives me the greatest of pleasures to introduce our next speaker, voted as the most trusted politician in a recent poll, and even Conservative voters have more faith in him than their own Shadow Chancellor, George Osborne. Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats and Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, the People's Chancellor, Dr. Vincent Cable MP.
Well, thank you very much for that warm reception. I find it rather reassuring after the embarrassment I think I experienced as a result of that discovery that I was more popular with Tory voters than George. Anyway, the next election is going to be fought over the economy and who can be trusted to deal with the legacy of financial collapse and recession. And there are those who will tell you that there are only two options. And one of them is to trust the people who led us into this mess to get us out of it. But this is a triumph of hope over experience, and frankly, there are only so many ways of saying that Labour's finished, and they've already been said, so I won't add to them. The question I think the country's asking is whether they can trust instead a team of young things who have no known beliefs or convictions beyond a sense of entitlement to rule and a mission to look after their own. And whose lifetime experience of business is confined to managing their Billingdon Club bar accounts. The fact is that the country faces enormous economic challenges. We've got rising unemployment, we've got a failed banking system, falling tax revenues, rising government spending, and the task of balancing economic recovery with environmental imperatives. And these are big jobs, they're big jobs for people who've been tested in the real world of work. Now, our economy has experienced a massive heart attack, the economic equivalent of a heart attack, with the banks at its centre. And it survived in the intensive care unit, and it's now showing signs of recovery thanks to modern economic medicine. And let's reflect on what's happened. Interest rates have been slashed, vast amounts of monetary steroids, enormous fiscal deficits have been incurred, the banking system been rescued and part nationalised across the world, and the clinicians, the central banks and governments, deserve some credit for prompt action. But serious damage has been done, and life will not be the same again, and lifestyles are going to have to be changed. So let me set out the practical steps to recovery, what I would do if I were the Lib Dem Chancellor. Urgent action first is required on unemployment. At least 750,000 more people have been made unemployed since this time last year. 1 million young people under 25 are now out of work. Let me just give you a short quote. The most urgent problem of all is unemployment. It's bad business. It injures the morale of hundreds and thousands of young people who've not gained the habit of work. Now, those are not my words, but David Lloyd George in the 1929 general election. I mean, who would have imagined that we'd be back there again? And indeed, reliving the tragedy of Thatcher thrown on the scrap heap. So Thatcher thrown on the scrap heap. So the question is, what's to be done? Well, we first of all got to stop private sector jobs bleeding away as good credit-worthy companies are throttled by the banks. The banks have lurched from irresponsible binge lending, which caused the crisis, to an equally senseless hoarding of capital, which is now destroying jobs and suffocating enterprises. The banks that have been rescued or underwritten by the taxpayer must be treated as the servants, not the masters of the economy. We own them, they don't own us. And the unemployed have got to be found productive work, and we should learn from the experience of Scandinavia and other countries where the alternative to long-term unemployment is a guarantee and indeed a requirement to work for young people training or study. Now, there's no shortage of socially useful tasks, improving homes, environmental projects, care work, and these can be undertaken on the basis of voluntary sector, local government initiatives. And there are lots of imaginative private sector schemes, like the plan to create 500,000 IT jobs. And there have got to be more apprenticeships to ensure that the next generation learns skills and trades. You know, real, not financial engineering is what this country needs. And I mean, it really is simple common sense that it's more sensible, more rational to pay people to do something useful rather than to pay them to be idle, on benefit and paying no tax. Fundamentally disagree with the Tory approach to this problem. Fundamentally disagree with the Tory approach to this problem. Because what they would do is to sit and watch unemployment grow. But once recession recedes, we've got to tackle the next big challenge, which is managing the massive and unsustainable public sector borrowing. Now, we shouldn't be taken in by the hysterical nonsense about the country being bankrupt. It isn't bankrupt. But there is a big problem. And the public doesn't need George Osborne's imaginary secret documents or conspiracy theories to work out that the public finances are in a bad shape. I mean, what's happened is that the government's living beyond its means. It's absorbed the massive cost of the financial collapse. Government tax receipts, actually, as a share of national income, have now collapsed to a level which is lower than at any time since Harold Macmillan was Prime Minister half a century ago. Well, you live in a low-tax economy. You may not realize it, may not feel it, but you are. And this enormous budget deficit isn't just because of recession. There is a structural problem. Public spending expanded on the back of tax receipts from financial services, the city, from a bubble in the housing market, which were temporary windfalls, but they were treated as permanent. And the government deficit now will have to be cut substantially. And if it isn't, there will be a risk of escalating borrowing costs and a debt trap. Spending first. Now, if public spending is cut in the usual way, which is slash and burn, there will be a great deal of damage to local and national services. The good will be cut with the bad, frontline services will be butchered, and lower paid workers will be is better than cut. There are far too many government officials and quangos overseeing. There are far too many government officials and quangos overseeing local government, the NHS and teachers. There is no need for vast central government databases like the ID card, the so-called super database and the NHS IT scheme. Tax credits extend far too far up the income scale. There are too many unaffordable defence commitments and procurement contracts, including, of course, the Trident submarines, which we would stop. And I would add civil service mandarins and actually members of Parliament who enjoy very generous subsidised public sector pensions which desperately need reform. Because it's grossly unfair when the basic state pension is less than the poverty level, when the pension age is to rise to 68, and occupational pensions in private firms have been cut to shreds. They've got to be reformed. And then there's the industrial welfare state, which absorbs billions through regional development agencies and other quangos of questionable relevance. And let me touch on a controversial area. I mean, we all love the NHS, but nobody can seriously claim that it couldn't be better run. Of course it could. All aspects of public spending have to be looked at critically, which is what all of you do who sit on local councils, and those Liberal Democrat councils across the country look at all your spending as a matter of course. There is absolutely no credibility and no future in being the last of the big spenders. Now, don't get me wrong, I can personally think of lots of things that it would be great to spend lots of money on. I mean, I've campaigned, personally, for more resources for mental health, for adult education, children's hospices, bee research, science in general. I mean, these are things I believe in. But economic reality means that if more spent on something, then there's less somewhere else. And the politicians who are going to offer expensive freebies will, I fear, be treated with the same contempt as the bankers who are lapping up their double cream bonuses year after year, succeed or fail. Now, nobody does political cynicism better than the Tories, and they pose as tough guys, cutting spending sooner and deeper than everybody else. But we've just exposed them as having committed to a massive 53 billion of extra spending. That's more than the total defence budget. Now, if we did that, we'd be accused of being fantasists or dishonest or ill-disciplined. But these people are so arrogant, that they think they can cruise into Downing Street without anybody noticing. And it isn't just that. The Liberal Democrat approach to spending is fundamentally different from the Tories. What the Tories are proposing is cuts carried out in secret, behind closed doors, after the election if they win. We want an open democratic debate about priorities. They want to control everything from Whitehall, just like Labour. But we believe in local government. Local decision-making is more accountable and more efficient. And what this involves is lifting the dead hand of centralisation, scrapping the command and control quangos, which treat local elected representatives like children. We would give additional roles to councils through help commissioning. And with all that, of course, should go responsibility, including more local revenue raising powers, including business rates. The Liberal Democrat approach to tax is also fundamentally different from the Tories. The Tories' top priority, of course, is to cut taxes on millionaires. Our top priority is fairer taxes for those on lower and middle incomes. Now, it would be dishonest and unbelievable for me to say that taxes overall should never rise. But the Liberal Democrats' starting position is to aim for fairer, not higher taxes. And I would do this by lifting tax thresholds, providing an incentive to work and to save. And it is actually wrong, quite apart from the economics, it's just wrong that people on the minimum wage should be dragged into paying tax. And lifting the threshold to £10,000 would mean that 4 million low-paid workers and pensioners would no longer have to pay any income tax. So let's be clear, my priority would be to cut income tax for those on low and middle incomes. And how would it be paid for? Of course, it's got to be paid for. It would be paid for by closing tax loopholes and privileges enjoyed by the relatively wealthy. The big differential between top-rate income and capital gains tax, the exceptionally generous tax relief given to people with very large pension pots, the blatant abuse of tax haven status, including businesses paying stamp duty offshore. There's a programme, I believe, due to be screened this evening that will expose the complicity on a very large scale of a bank, Lloyds, a bank part-owned by the taxpayer, in large-scale tax avoidance. And this has got to be stopped, and it's got to be stopped now. You may also recall that I proposed a small annual levy, half a penny in the pound, on property values over £1 million. Now, since then, we've seen the super-rich pouring their money, not into productive, job-creating businesses, but into acquiring mansions. And remember, too, that under our unfair council tax system, the likes of Mr. Mittal and Mr. Abramovich, in their £30 million palaces, pay exactly the same as a Band H family home, though their properties may be worth. And this small levy alone would lift 300,000 low-paid workers and pensioners out of tax. And that is surely right. I think beyond that, we've got to lead the debate on tax reform, as a Liberal government did a century ago with the People's Budget. We should be aiming to shift the tax burden further from incomes, from work, savings and innovation, onto pollution, our green tax switch. We should be switching taxation onto financial pollution, questionable transactions of no social and economic value, and onto land values instead of penalising productive investment. But at the heart of the tax plans, the fundamentals must be a commitment to social justice. We've got a seriously distorted economy. It's over-dependent for growth and revenue on the financial services industry. And Gordon Brown's unwillingness to take on the vested financial interests is, well, it borders on the pathetic. The principles should be clear. Full and compulsory disclosure of all pay, bonuses, perks for all those people earning more than the Prime Minister. The breakup of the big banks, which are currently too big to fail, so that the taxpayer is no longer underwriting their casino operations. There is a role for casinos, but they belong in Las Vegas, not in the banking industry. We want straightforward, simple banks which do the basic things well, not laboratories for financial rocket scientists. And beyond that, we need a financing mechanism to meet the big investment needs of the long term, the projects which will be at the heart of a green economy. Things like tidal power, high-speed rail, carbon capture and storage, telecommunication. And at the moment, bank finance in this market are on their own. They're too short-term. The investments won't happen. Yet there are billions of pounds worth of potential private investment looking for safe long-term return on equity or bonds. And there are lots of frustrated British small savers looking for a better outlook for their money. What I suggest we look at is a British version of the European Investment Bank, or Obama's US Investment Bank, which can bring together private capital and professional management under government sponsorship and make sure that this green future is realised through real investment. The economic heart attack, which I started with, it's been traumatic and life-threatening, but it also serves as a warning to change our lifestyles in a radical way. And the Liberal Democrats, under Nick Clegg's leadership, have a duty, as well as an opportunity, to press home the message about fundamental political and economic change. Fundamental political and economic change. The other two parties, like the banks, are only too happy to return to business as usual, but that is no longer an option. The country faces a bigger set of economic and political challenges than at any time since the Second World War. The Gordon Brown government is exhausted. It's like an extinct volcano. And we have a so-called official opposition, which is callow, pitifully ill-equipped, politically, morally, and intellectually for the task ahead. By contrast, the Liberal Democrats, our party, have the expertise and the competence and the commitment to fairness, which is so obviously lacking in the other parties. So if there were ever a time for the Liberal Democrats, this is it. Take it. Thank you.
Vince, thank you for your truly inspiring speech. Conference this afternoon.